So Palmer was in about second grade, and he and his friend John were Mr. Cool. And they were stud-mo guys, you know, big 7-year-olds. And they kept bullying. They just kept being kind of nasty to a couple of other little kids. And so one time we were at a baseball, the baseball team or t-ball team, whatever, all went out for ice cream. And we saw, my friend and I, the other mother, and I saw them just not being nice to this third kid. And we talked and we're like, we have got to do something about this. So what we ended up doing is the two families, we called a family meeting, sent the other 4 boys out to play, and 2 moms and 2 dads sat down with 2 little second graders who were having issues with bullying. And then we gave them each an assignment. And they had to interview 3 people. And they had to ask that person, have you ever been bullied? The second question was, how did it feel when you were bullied? And the third question was, how did you feel about that person who was bullying you? And then they had to write it up because they were in second grade, so they were, you know, it was a good time to be practicing writing, and so they had to write a little report. They had 1 week to do it, and then the next week we got back together again as families, and they had to deal with all 4 of us parents again. And it was fascinating what these little boys learned. One of them learned, well, my son called my dad and learned that, you know, my dad, who was like 70 years old at the time, could still tell you the name of the kid who bullied him, where he was when it happened, and that when he thought of that guy, that was the first thing he thought about, was being bullied. And I think they were astounded to think that someone would remember it that long. And so I think it just made such an impact on these kids to hear it from other people. And so I liked it because it kind of opens it up, makes them admit what they're doing that's not so cool, instead of keeping it tucked aside, and let them still be loved even though they make mistakes. Keaton had to do the same thing when he was in kindergarten. He kept slapping little girls on the bottom. The teacher talked to him about it. I talked to him about it, and there was no stopping him. I'm like, what am I going to do to stop this kid from smacking these girls? And so he had to do the same kind of exercise where he had to call 3 different women and ask them, have you ever been touched in a way that you didn't like? And how did you feel? And how did you think that person thought about you? And so what was fascinating to me is he picked the mothers of the girls that he was doing it to. So they weren't necessarily like my closest friends or his godmother or aunt or anyone like that. So I called them first, and he came back in from his phone calls. I remember, like, he was only 6, so I would call the mom, explain to her, give him the phone. He went and talked a few minutes, and then came back in and just reported to me. He didn't have to write it all out. And he came back in with his eyes as big as saucers, because they all felt like when they had had that experience, they felt like the man who had done it didn't respect them. And that was so not what he was trying to say, you know? He was trying to say, I like you. And it was the biggest eye-opener for this little boy. Behavior totally went away. Okay, and then Landon, this book was made in March of 2009. He has been a cusser. And so he had to call and interview 3 people. What do you think about people who cuss? Do you like to hang out with people who cuss? Something like that. He had 2 or 3 people he had to call. So Grandpa said, I think people who cuss are not very educated, and I would rather find others who don't cuss to hang out with. So anyway, this was his book that he put together, and it totally stopped the problem. Nothing had stopped the problem for 3 years, and this has just totally eliminated it. And part of what I like about this idea is it's not lecturing, and it's not all from me. He just gets to learn. He gets to learn from other adults. I asked them, who is somebody that you really respect, that you admire, that you like, that you'd like to be like? And they each named somebody. And then I said 2 things. I said, 1, is this something that you think they would do? And they both said no. And I said, is this something that you would do if they were watching you? And they said no. So I thought that was kind of a way of developing a little bit of a Jiminy Cricket, not necessarily mom and dad, you know, finger wagging, but somebody else that they respect, thinking, would I do this in public?